Rory Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It seems that the challenge here with the Chilcot inquiry is our inability in Britain to come to terms with failure, our inability to come to terms with what exactly went wrong in Iraq, our inability to reform, and as a result, a real problem in acting in the world in the future. Unless we go through the process, whether through the Chilcot inquiry or through this Parliament or in some other ways of actually coming to terms with who we are and how we got it wrong, we are going to remain paralysed. Iraq is sitting, it feels at the moment, like some rotting corpse in a cupboard that we don't quite understand. And you can see the consequences of that in the problems of British foreign and defence policy in the last 13 years. You can see the inability to come to terms with Iraq in our mistakes in Afghanistan. You can also see the inability to come to terms with Iraq in our current inaction. Britain at the moment is in a very paralysed state. There's a deep insecurity and an anxiety. We're not pulling enough weight in NATO. We're not pulling enough weight in the United Nations. We're failing to commit to 2% of defence spending, which is symptomatic of our inability to come to terms with Putin or Ukraine. And all of this comes back to that four-letter word, Iraq. Iraq has become for us a kind of Vietnam. It's become for the British consciousness something which we can't get beyond, something that we can't see through. The reason why the Chilcot inquiry therefore needs to be published is for us in Britain to understand what happened in Iraq, to understand exactly what happened in Iraq, to introduce the reforms that we need in this government to be able to act again in the future, and to recover our confidence as a nation. One of the problems in this debate, I think, and perhaps the problem with the Chilcot inquiry, has been that the understanding of what went wrong in Iraq is still too limited. We're still, understandably, very obsessed with the legality of the war, and we're very obsessed also with the issue of post-war planning. But of course, in Afghanistan, we went into a war which was legal in those terms, and where, at least in Helmand, a great deal of planning took place, and yet the results were also a mess. In other words, the problem of Iraq can't simply be reduced to legality and post-war planning. There's a deeper problem in Iraq. And the deeper problem in Iraq, which is something I think we all struggle to deal with, is a problem with ourselves. It's a problem with who Britain is, what Britain does in the world. One way of expressing it is that we're failing to come to terms with our limits, with the limits of our knowledge, the limits of our capacity, and the limits of our legitimacy.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way and his call for that reflection. He may recall that after 9/11, when the American ambassador was on the Question Time programme, the reaction of the American ambassador to some of the things that were being said to him, and there seemed to be an inability to look in the mirror and to see the effects of foreign policy of the West pre-9/11 in exactly some of the things that were happening in the world and the anger that was created in the world. So therefore I congratulate him on his call for the use of a mirror and to look at ourselves, and look at ourselves very hard.
I think perhaps where I would disagree, though, with the honourable member, and thank him for his intervention, is that this is a call for more confidence and more seriousness, not for less. The problem with the way that we've interpreted Iraq is that we've ended up with despair. This empty house, the lack of interest from journalists, the general lack of focus on this issue, implies that Britain wants to put this in the past, put it in its history, and try to behave as though this relates to some other country, some other government, rather than to us. The lessons of Iraq have to be, amongst other things, lessons of seriousness. We're not serious as a country. What Chilcot needs to focus on above all, and this is why it's a problem in the Chilcot inquiry that they didn't spend enough time taking evidence from people who operated in civilian roles in provincial areas, is our lack of seriousness on the ground. And this involves criticising ourselves in ways that we don't like to do. It's going to involve us as a country getting beyond our anxieties, and this is a very difficult thing to say, our anxieties about soldiers dying in vain. A soldier's life cannot be held relative to the decisions of politicians. A soldier's courage, a soldier's sacrifice is a commitment to their country. The danger of reducing every mistake that this country has made, from the Boer War to 1842 to our recent debacle in Iraq, to the question of soldiers' life, is it stifles debate. Nobody can stand up and criticize what we did for the fear that somebody might say soldiers died in vain. So criticism begins with accepting that we weren't serious enough in our commitment to Iraq.
Quite right.
American soldiers did 13-month tours. Why did we only do 6-month tours? American civilians took leave once every 6 months. British diplomats took leave every 6 weeks for 2 weeks. We remained highly isolated in compounds under security restrictions which made it very difficult for us to engage with the local population. There was a serious failure to reach out to people who understood Iraq and the area. There was a lack of seriousness and commitment on the ground. There was an obsession with abstraction and jargon. We stood up in this house and we stood up in the Foreign Service talking all the time about the rule of law, governance, civil society, human rights, and we had absolutely no idea how to relate this kind of jargon to the reality on the ground in Iraq. In fact, what we were doing again and again is using words which looked like a plan but was simply a description of what we did not have. Every time we said what we need to bring to Iraq is governance, the rule of law and security, we were simply saying Iraq was corrupt, unjust and violent. Every time we said we need to create transparent, predictable and accountable financial processes, we were simply saying what we did not have. This, therefore, means that as we move forward, and as Chilcot hopefully helps us to come to terms with this catastrophe, we reform. And what does reform mean? Reform means getting serious. What I hope we can take from the Chilcot inquiry is that seriousness begins with investing in knowledge and understanding of other people's countries. Where I differ perhaps from the honourable members opposite, the honourable members of the Scottish Nationalist Party, is I don't think this means that the future for Britain is to become Denmark. I don't think the future for Britain is to withdraw. The future for Britain is to reach out, to understand.
And this is where I've got to disagree with the honourable gentleman. Denmark was once in the Empire game. Historians have noted that Denmark withdrew itself from the Empire game. It's time for us to learn from Denmark.
Well said.
Understand absolutely that that is indeed the honourable member's position. Our position instead should be different, and this is where Britain differs from a country like Denmark. It should firstly be about knowledge, investing in knowledge in the Foreign Office, which means ensuring there are proper language allowances, ensures that we dismantle the grisly core competency framework for promotion, ensure we get out of a situation where only 3 out of 15 ambassadors in the Middle East can speak Arabic.
Well, on that, will the gentleman give way? I don't know if he remembers, but I think it was in 2007 or 2008. There were no fluent Pashtun speakers across the Foreign Office, the MOD, or DFID in Afghanistan.
Rory, Stewart.
Absolutely no fluent Pashto speakers and only 2 operational Dari speakers in our embassy in Kabul. It also means we need to develop the habit of challenge. Honourable Member.
Gentleman, whom I admire. But as he's speaking, I can almost see him in his pith helmet, striding across the Punjab as a district commissioner in another era. And his remarks about Denmark compound that. He and I both know we almost lost our own country just last September. We were almost severed, dismembered, because of the collapse in credibility of the British political class. And I promise the honourable gentleman, we're not going to get that back by being better imperialists than the last group of politicians have been.
We will get it back by being serious again. We will get it back by showing the British public that we have acknowledged failure, that we've understood that failure, that we've learned the lessons and that we've reformed. And we will get it back by showing the superiority of Britain to a smaller conception of ourselves is ultimately not in pith helmets, but as an engaged global power. But that does include, within the Ministry of Defence, our ability to challenge ourselves. Our ability also, which we've lost in Iraq today, to provide an independent assessment of US missions. It includes, ultimately, our chiefs of staff recovering their confidence. This is a good time to remember this, because I think where myself and the honourable members opposite will agree is that on the 70th anniversary of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the conclusion that Britain should draw from Iraq is not isolation, is not that we should be doing nothing. It should instead be that we recover our confidence as a country, recover the confidence that we are the 5th largest economy in the world, that we have unique skills and expertise, we have an enormous amount to contribute to the world, and that what we should take from the Chilcot inquiry is not despair, is not paralysis, but is a recovery of our compassion, our common sense, and our confidence.
It will be helpful